Good afternoon, everybody. Please do keep eating. Enjoy your food. I think there's going to be some coffee coming around, but we're going to go ahead and get started just so we can have as much time as possible. But please do continue eating and continue enjoying your wine and continue enjoying the coffee while we go ahead and get started with our program. I'm Keith Richburg. I'm the president of the FCC. I want to thank you all for coming and being a part of this really great event. And please, if you're a member, or even if you're not a member, keep watching fcchk.org for our upcoming events, because we have a lot of great events upcoming. I don't know if you've signed up already for our September 26th film showing of Roadrunner, a film about Anthony Bourdain. But if you haven't, get yourself on the waiting list, because with some of these films, we actually have the permission to show it a second time. And we usually go to people who are on the waiting list. And we'll have a couple of other films coming up in the month of September. I can't tell you what they are yet, because we're still getting the rights. But please do get yourself, watch fcchk.org, set your Gmail to give you alerts so you don't miss it. I know some of these things sell out very quickly, so you're going to be really quick to sign up or get yourself on the waiting list. And I am very excited about today's event. It's basically going to be talking about this book, which is an autobiography, but also a biography of Mr. Hilton Cheong-Leen. Now, if you were like myself, I got a chance to read the book, but I did not know Mr. Hilton Cheong-Leen, or did not know about him until I started reading the book, and I did not realize that every time you take a walk in Hong Kong, when you take the promenade on Kowloon side, if you go to the museum over on Kowloon side, if you take a minibus in Hong Kong, if you go to an arts event, you're probably bumping into something that Mr. Hilton Cheong-Leen had something to do with. And I'm very excited that there's so many members of his family here in the audience as well because of this book. Unfortunately, Mr. Hilton Cheong-Leen passed away earlier this year at the age of 100, so he could not be here. So that's why we have an empty chair here with the book on it. Although it's his book, as much as the two authors here. So that's why we're kind of honoring him here. But we do have his co-authors and ghostwriters and co-authors and the ones who finished the book and got it out to publication. We have Oliver Chou and Gary Cheung here. They both were at SCMP, although neither is anymore, I guess. Gary here has covered politics, education, and integration between Hong Kong and the mainland since the 1990s. He was at Singtao Daily, Overseas Chinese Daily, South China Morning Post, and other places. He only recently left and is now at Chinese University of Hong Kong. And so please be polite with him in the questioning, because his boss is also here. And then, Oliver Chou, on my right, got a PhD in music history from the University of Hong Kong, where I teach. And he also taught at Chinese University of Hong Kong. And he's the author of award-winning History of Central Philharmonic Orchestra in Hong Kong. He is also a former SCMP reporter. He's written about music, but at the moment he's now at the Academy of Performing Arts. So without further adu, I'm going to turn it over to the two guests first for a bit of an introduction to the book and to what they know about Mr. Hilton Cheong-Leen. And we're going to start with you, Gary.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Thanks, Keith, for introducing me and Oliver. Actually, this is the second time I spoke here. 5 years ago, I spoke for the 50th anniversary of the 1967 disturbances. So my honor to appear again. We specially arranged FCC to have an empty seat for Hilton, who sadly failed to see the light of this book because of some publication arrangement technicalities that the book was not ready before his passing. Anyway, the silver lining is the book finally came out in July. Let me have a few words to introduce a bit about Mr. Hilton Cheong-Leen. Many people may be younger than 30 or even 40 may have little idea about who Hilton is. Actually, he is a famous Chinese poet. Oh, sorry.
Go backward.
Backward. Hey? Yeah. Maybe back to the, yeah. Actually, to draw a may not be appropriate analogy. If people describe Martini as father of Hong Kong democracy, in some sense we can describe Hilton as the grandfather of Hong Kong democracy, constitutional reform in gradual manner, in a cautious manner. I will venture on a bit later. This is the picture of Hilton speaking in Letchko, I reckon in 1970s. Yeah. And this is a book cover, as you see here. Is it backward? This is the gist of Hilton's life. He was born in 1922 and passed away in January this year. He was born in Guyana, then a British colony in South America. And his family emigrated to Hong Kong in 1931, and he went on to La Salle College, and he entered the business world, and then become a urban councillor in 1957, and formed the Hong Kong Civic Association, which the current chairman, Mr. Frederick Lam, is here, is present. The Civic Association is, to this day, the oldest serving political organization in Hong Kong. I think in 1960s, its member was more than 10,000 people. And Hilton had two spells as legislator in 1970s and 1980s. And most important, he served as chairman of the Urban Council, which was responsible for municipal services in Hong Kong, like wet market, hygiene, sanitary works. His chairmanship of the Urban Council earned him the nickname Hong Kong Mayor, which is the title of this book. And I mentioned a bit that Hilton may be arguably be described as the grandfather of Hong Kong constitutional reform. Is that Hilton was of the view that Hong Kong should move gradually towards representative government in a gradual and cautious manner, without Hong Kong becoming an independent state and provoking China. And to this end, in 1960, he joined hands with a liberal-minded barristers, Bernanke, also passed away, I think, in late 1990s, to fly to London to lobby the British government to allow a quicker pace of democratic development in Hong Kong. Their demands are quite modest, having some more elected seats on the Urban Council, and the next step to allow urban councillors to elect their representative to sit on the Letchko. By today's standard, is very modest, but the sad reality is British officials were quite dismissive about this modest demand for democratic reform. And they even, quite frankly, query whether Hilton and Civic Association really represents the views of Hong Kong people. Here we can have some sense of the British government was quite negative and even hypocritical towards the demands of Hong Kong people in 1950s and 1960s. One of the reasons why Britain object to democratic development is they believe that Hong Kong people only care about making money, earning bread and butter, and many people argue, according to my study of British archive, is London was worried about Beijing's opposition to democratic reform in Hong Kong. And here, just for our reference and discussion, China's State Council last December issued a white paper on Hong Kong democratic development. They argue that the British government repeatedly rejected all calls for democratic reform in Hong Kong, which is true. But whether it's the half truth, the complete truth is subject to discussion and argument. I leave it to judgment of all of you. And another interesting anecdote of Hilton's advocacy in gradual democratic development is, if I did not co-author this book, I didn't realize that there was an interesting anecdote in 1970, March 1970, that there was a walkout by 10 elected members of Urban Council from the Urban Council chamber. They did in protest of the colonial government's refusal to allow a faster pace of development of local government, to be set expansion of urban councils' function to cover areas like education, health services, and in my knowledge, this sort of thing was usually done by people like Long Hair, Leung Kok Hong, etc. But to my surprise, it was done by a gentleman, a courteous, nice gentleman, Hilton Cheong-Leen, and other, by today's standard, rather conservative elected councillors. But it spoke volume about the depth of some educated elites' demand for a reasonable pace of development of representative government in Hong Kong. And this dramatic walkout was orchestrated by Hilton. And another major advocacy of Hilton is his call for compulsory education. Hilton strongly believed that to improve the welfare of low-income people, children from low-income family, the Hong Kong government should earmark more resources to provide basic education to poor children. Otherwise, they won't have their ends meet when they grow up. And I remember Hilton's friends, Stacy, that what Hilton talked about Hong Kong government's unwillingness to provide more resources to improve education was, by today's standard, jokingly quite subversive and threatening. That he points fingers towards the colonial government's insincerity in improving the lot of poor people. And by failing to do this, he warned that many poor kids could end up his or her life in selling dim sum in restaurants, doing lousy jobs in factory. That's no good for the betterment of the society. And my conclusion is sorry, my spelling is mistake. Hilton could be summed up as a pragmatic reformer, and I can say that if I can conclude, Hilton is a gentleman, reformer who believe in doing things, starting with small success and advocating improvement in various aspects, policy area, while recognizing constraints and realities. That's my brief observation of Hilton's for the 4 or 5 years I worked together with Hilton on this book. That's my part. Now move on to Oliver.
Oliver, please.
Hi, good afternoon. This is a dream come true, but not exactly. I dream about this moment when we authors would share the stage and talk about the book to friends and family and associates, but not exactly because Hilton is not here. But I always felt he's always here. That's why we arranged a third chair with a book, which he is one of the authors. And I and Gary always feel very, very honored to be a part of this project. I did not know Hilton personally until one day I received an email from him in 2018. And he invited me to take part in this book. And of course, I cannot see any reason why I would say no. And then the next 4 years were a really special time period in which I learned so much about this man. And I thought I had knew him before, but actually I didn't until he sent me information and all the proceedings of the Urban Council for me to look at. And as a historian myself, I would look up every single word, every single questions and answers that he would say during those Urban Council moments. And I was astounded, to put it mildly. I could not believe what I saw in those official records. And 2 years ago, he got us to be with a Singapore publisher, the World Scientific. And in a rare document, we had to put our name down in the agreement. And this is what you see here, all these 3 names. If you get a book, well, you can get Gary and my autograph. And for Hilton, take a deep look at this picture, and there you get the autograph. And the 3 of us. I have collected a few pictures. I have this obsession of getting pictures. And this is one in 2020, July 3rd. Gary and myself and Hilton. Oh, one very good thing about talking to Hilton is that he always took us to some fancy restaurants and meals, except FCC. This is the China Recreation Club in Causeway Bay. And the other gentleman you see there is Darwin Chan. And Darwin is the godfather of culture in Hong Kong, and Hilton was his boss. You can see how senior Hilton was. And so the 2 of us really counted ourselves very, very lucky to be in the league of these legends. And that's Hilton, 2019, and he took me to another fancy restaurant in Central. One thing about Hilton, when he started talking, he would not eat. That's bugged me quite a bit because I dare not eat if he didn't eat. So during the lunch, in most cases, the food just stayed there until it got very cold and we kept talking. So after each meal, I always have to go to McDonald's and grab a Big Mac to make up. But anyway, joke aside, this is how serious we get ourselves into this project. And that is also one reason why I feel so sad that he did not live to see it. We thought he would because we submitted all our transcripts to the publisher by end of 2020. But for some reason, it got delayed, until you know what. And that's our last meeting with Hilton at his house, almost 2 years from now. I remember, I'm sure Gary remembers that too, that it was near Mid-Autumn Festival. And when we went there, he treated us some mooncake. It was lovely. I will never forget that. If you want to hear what he says on that occasion, I have a clip here by about 1 minute. I would like to share it with you. We were talking about the number of pages the book should be, because the publisher is very strict about the number of pages because it would affect the cost. Let me share that clip with you.
This is just about your visit to Beijing and Canton, Beijing.
It doesn't have return.
No, this is just about your visit to.
Sorry, I got the wrong. Maybe this one. Okay.
But Hilton, when I went through the...
Sorry, I got the number of pages wrong. Maybe this one.
This is just about your visit to Beijing and Canton, Beijing.
It doesn't have return to Hong Kong.
Right.
That is a very important part.
Yeah. You only mentioned your arrival.
And yes, so I have done I've done a short edition, which I owe you, and I will send to you.
Please.
Very shortly. This is already typed up.
Sure.
And after showing it to you, then I will send it over to.
I have another concern,
Yes.
and that is if this is just about your Beijing trip, and this already takes up so much, I wonder if the book will be within 300 pages.
Well, this is the big question which three of us must decide on, because that's why.
And how many pages we have to write?
You see,
Yeah.
how many pages are these?
250.
I like it because it's as easy for adults to read.
260. Yeah.
260.
So say 300.
The last word is 300. If you have a book, turn to the last page and see how many pages this book has. It's 299. We live up to his standard. We are very proud of that. So that's one of our final conversations at his place. And this book is all based on primary sources. Aside from one half of the book written by the man himself, both Gary and I put our chapters together according to primary sources, newspaper clippings, and the proceedings, official meeting minutes at ERPCO and LACHCO. I am very happy to share with you that there were 3 clippings I shared with Hilton, which he had not seen before. And I still remember his eyes glowed. Oliver, where did you find this? First one. A 1937 South China Morning Post. When he was 15 years old, his name was in there as a choir member of the Little Flower Choir, singing in St. Teresa Church in Waterloo Road. And I saw his name there. Okay. And then the next clip, 1939, November 23rd, SCMP. You see his name, he got a certificate in first aid. One of the FCC members asked me earlier, she said, how did he learn all this hygiene and health things? There you go. These 2 clips tell a lot of things. The first thing about him being a choir member explains why he is so keen about arts and culture. He had that in early training and interest. And secondly, health and hygiene. He got this certificate, but it happened long before that. When he was in Guyana, Georgetown, his mom was very obsessed about cleanliness in the house. So Hilton, being the eldest son of the family, was very much affected by it. So he was very meticulous about hygiene. As a matter of fact, in one of the chapters, here is the chapter of the book. You can see part 1, Hilton did all this himself. These are all his writings. When I read his writing, I feel very, very intimidated. How am I going to write alongside with Hilton? He was such a great writer. Read it, by all means. You will enjoy it. And then in part 2, Hilton Cheong-Leen, my entrepreneurship, and then part 3, public service. Now, public service is the part Hilton invited Gary and I to write. I did 6 chapters from arts, culture, recreation, public hygiene, transport, and hawkers. And then Gary did the 3 tough ones: housing, constitutional reform, and education. We base all this on primary sources. And as I said earlier, I learned so much during that process. And in the appendix, there are 2. The one from his visit to Beijing in 1950, I am very sad to say that he only supplied the first part of it. But that part itself is fascinating. He went to Beijing from Hong Kong through Canton, by train. That was from April 1950 to June 1950. And that was right before the Korean War. And that was only a few months after the PRC was established. So he explained in details where he saw at each railway station. This is a fascinating primary source for people to understand what new China was like shortly after the communists took over. Absolutely fascinating. But very unfortunately, he didn't supply us with how he got back to Hong Kong. And what he saw in Beijing, that part is a missing link. Maybe the family members here could follow up on that. I would love to read what Hilton and his wife, Pauline, saw in Beijing, because Pauline was from Beijing, and how he came back to Hong Kong. And then the second appendix is about an odd subject, Wuhan songsters. You may want to know what Wuhan songsters have to do with Hilton. It had everything to do with Hilton. First of all, his wife, Pauline, was a member of the Wuhan songsters. And secondly, this appendix is the only chapter in the book that Hilton read. Okay? I find it very, very special. I found it so special that I decided to write it for the Chinese media. So I did a long story for them in Tai Kung Pao. They gave me the full page. And then what made Hilton very happy is this part. That's Pauline there singing in 1956. And I mentioned Hilton as well. And that made him very, very happy. And during his, when he replied to my draft, he did not change anything except one thing. He said, Oliver, please write Pauline as Mrs. Pauline Cheong-Leen. And then he added the date of their marriage. I find it very heartwarming. Before that picture, I would like to share with you another soundbite. Remember Gary talked about Hilton walked out with a group of urban councillors? Actually, we brought that point up when we talked to him in our last conversation. Now, notice what Hilton replied. At the age of 98. Okay, this is exclusive. Okay?
But Hilton, when I went through the urban council proceeding, I noticed there was some points you got angry. In early 1970s, when you spoke at urban council meeting, you were unhappy with the lack of progress of the review of the function of urban council, and you told the chairman that you and several members, elected members, are going to quit the meeting, withdraw from the meeting. You, Bernanke and Henry Hu, etc., and civic association member.
We knew how to play the game and still keep together.
We know how to play the game and keep it together. That's very important. That raised the point, do we know how to play the games? Or the present policymakers, do they know how to play the game and keep things together? I think that is very thought-provoking. And after that, it was past lunchtime, and we had to go back to our office. So this is
Here, we are facing a new challenge, and this new challenge is that Hong Kong will remain a capitalist city. Because this is how we can get investment from the non-communist world, right? So this.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we have to go. And
Okay.
could we have a picture together?
What?
And the picture is here. That's our last picture before we had to go back to our office. Had we known that we would never see Hilton again, we would have extended lunch until dinner time and until you know when. So thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll leave that up. Oh, let's leave the picture up while we're chatting here. And I know we have some questions in the audience, but I just have a couple myself, which is, first of all, as I was reading it, I was fascinated. In the early years, especially his, the Japanese occupation of Hong Kong, how he had to flee from Kowloon side to Hong Kong side. He got slashed by triads in the hospital, then went over the border. It was so detailed. Did he keep diaries, or did he keep contemporaneous notes? Or how did he reconstruct all of that so perfectly?
I think he must have kept a diary. He must have. And the idea of writing a book actually did not start with us. I think he had that idea for a long time. And in fact, he had already engaged a professor at Hong Kong U Space, Sunny Low, to do the book. But for some reason, it did not materialize. And when I was at Hong Kong U Space, I think that was how the connection came about. Sunny Low told Hilton that Oliver Chou is now with us, so he's an arts person, historian. So these chapters from Hilton's writing, I think should have been written for some time.
And following along, I noticed that in 1950 he started a publishing company, and then he started magazines, and he was actually a BBC reporter. How important was journalism in his life?
Oh, actually, may I supplement that? I think in 1946, shortly after the Second World War, he was offered a decent job by the South China Morning Post as a reporter with a monthly salary very attractive by those days standard, 500 Hong Kong dollar per month. But he rejected it. Yeah.
So you two worked at SCMP, but not Hilton, right?
And later on, he plunged into the business world, set up his own trading company, selling watches, other stuff, and get rich. Enjoy the business chamber, HKGCC, etc., and the rest in its history. And I remember that Oliver mentioned that if we know it could be our last lunch with Hilton at that point, we could ask for an extended lunch. Actually, every time I enjoy gathering with Hilton and Oliver on this project, nearly every gathering took more than 2 hours and even 3 hours. Actually, it's already quite an extended version. And sometimes I need to dash back to SCMP to do my job. But Hilton is always a patient gentleman, telling us everything he need to have go down to the book.
As you can hear from our conversation, sometimes we were quite disrespectful by intervening in what he said, because we both had that media training. So sometimes we get impatient.
We need to cut short sometimes.
Yeah, and we look at our watch. Newsroom 2:30, we have to go. So, but anyway, actually Hilton did not, stop writing with his business. he is a regular writer to letters to senator. If you have, the access to SCMP, type Hilton Cheong-Leen, you can see almost every month he had a letter to the news editor. It's amazing. Until the very last day, he kept writing. And his writing, as I said, put me to shame. Remember, he did not have a college education. It's amazing that the way he mastered the art of writing.
When I wrote an article for the how many 115th anniversary of the South China Morning Post 4 years ago, I wrote a story on interesting piece on letter to editor of SCMP, and I especially asked our librarian to do a calculation who are the most frequent, most prolific contributors of letters to SCMP. The answer is Hilton. My memory is since mid-1950s, he had written more than or nearly 800 letters to SCMP.
Wow.
It's really a record which couldn't be surpassed.
Let me ask you, on page 237, you write, apart from his call for constitutional reform, Cheung-Leen has been an ardent advocate of Hong Kong identity and Hong Kong citizenship since the 1960s.
Yes.
In an article in the Weekly Mirror published in October 1960, Cheung-Leen said the Civic Association was actively considering the advocacy of the status of a Hong Kong citizen.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he was an ardent promoter of Chinese culture, Chinese opera, Chinese arts. Are those two things compatible?
There is no conflict, indeed. Hilton was an admirer of Dr. Sun Yat-sen, the father of modern China. He believed, often mentioned about, he believed in Dr. Sun's, how to say it, 三民主义, the call for democracy and people's livelihood and
People's power.
People's power. And he is an admirer of Chinese culture, but he, as a long-time Hong Kong resident, why he suggests a call for the formation of Hong Kong identity? Because he know Hong Kong was a refugee society with many millions of Hong Kong people coming down from mainland because of the fear of communist China. He believed that to cement the society together, the government and the society should facilitate a strong sense of Hong Kong identity among people who see Hong Kong as their home. Actually, what his call coincide with Hong Kong government actions after the 1967 disturbances. Hong Kong government coincidentally also called for formation of Hong Kong identity, which that's another academic issue. Some people argue that this formation of Hong Kong identity, in some sense, caused some difficulty of for handover in the eyes of Beijing. Yeah.
In your last conversations with him, what did he think about where Hong Kong is now?
Well, he continues to believe Hong Kong as a very important center for the world to communicate with China. To the very end, he continued to mention about Xi Jinping and Carrie Lam, all these individual names he often mentioned in his conversation. And he likes using the word diaspora. He himself was one of, a member of the Chinese diaspora in the 20th century. And he continued to believe Hong Kong will play a role in that diaspora process. And as a matter of fact, one reason why the book was delayed is that we kept waiting for his epilogue. Hilton called me almost every month, telling me what's his latest. And he spent a lot of time drafting that epilogue. Very, very sadly, the book doesn't have it. He did not put his last word down. But during our phone conversations numerous times, this is what he believed in. But Chinese diaspora and Hong Kong will continue to play a role regardless of what's happening up north.
Yeah, and I think it's worth mentioning here, FCC Hong Kong. From my interaction with Hilton and other liberal-minded expatriates in Hong Kong, I sincerely believe that. We can see Hilton as an educated English-speaking gentleman having some kind of influence in Hong Kong society those days, and other expatriates or Caucasian, to use this word. Many of them are progressive, liberal-minded, calling for different kind of progress in Hong Kong society, like education, social welfare, and constitutional reform. I can say sincerely that Hong Kong owes a lot to these expatriates and English-speaking community, which we can't afford to forget. To say this thing is today maybe in some way politically incorrect, but I still dare to say.
Well, thank you so much. Questions from the audience, or I know you haven't probably read the book yet because it's only out now. Highly recommend it, especially if you're going to be traveling now that we are all traveling again. But do you have any questions, or from family members, any just thoughts or reflections on the veranda out there, right in the middle of the veranda in the white shirt? There's a microphone there.
Thank you. There seemed to be a little bit of a gap in the topics that were covered when you think about what was really current in the 70s and 80s. So I'd just like you to ask you about Hilton's attitudes to the anti-corruption efforts, and also about his relationship with Elsie Elliott.
Okay, who wants to take that one? First, anti-corruption efforts.
To the best of my knowledge, I didn't come across too much information or about Hilton's focus on the fight against anti-corruption, but I did come across some of his speech in Urban Council proceeding that he was supportive of cleaning up police and the government sector, but it seems he was not as giving as much effort as Elsie Elliott, who later on became LC2 in this aspect. As for his relationship with Elsie Elliott, I remember Elsie was a member of the Reform Club, not the Civic Association. Am I right? That's, to the best of my knowledge, Hilton was not that close to Elsie in those years, although they respect and admire each other in fighting various causes for people's livelihood. Yeah, maybe Frederick can supplement a bit on this.
Can we take a microphone here?
Well, according to my knowledge, Hilton and Elsie Elliott, I mean the two political groups, Reform Club and Civic Association, they are competing each other during elections. But within the within the urban council, they form a kind of coalition that they join force together to fight for better conditions for the people of Hong Kong. And I think this is something political parties nowadays should respect.
Or Ms. San Ching can supplement too.
Yeah, can we go back to the veranda here? I see a couple of interested family members.
Much. I'm San San. I was a member of the Civic Association, ran for the Urban Council election with my uncle's blessing and his urging. I was right in the time of Jack Cater, who appointed me to be the ICAC first cohort of advisory people, because I was less outspoken than Elsie Elliott. She was bombarding the government with accusations, anti-corruption words, very strong words against the police force. When I entered the ICAC as an advisor, Hilton was very diplomatic. He always referred to Mrs. Elliott, his opponent, as that woman. He was, that was the extent of his reference to Elsie Elliott at the time. But there was rampant corruption in all the departments of government, which was a surprise to us. We thought it was a police problem, but it stretched across all sectors of the industry, including education, including social welfare, including all kinds of industrial sectors. So that was an interesting find out. But my uncle always had a very backseat, low-key attitude towards it. In his heart, he was fighting for the 9 years education, the free education, and in his heart he was fighting for housing for all. In the MacLehose years, he was more liberal than the governments before. So a lot of the people who were anti-government and was about to tear down the government as advocates were invited into the advisory bodies. And that's where a lot of housing came about. Mei Fu San Chun was one of the satellite housing that was a good example of Hilton's advocacy work, that we should have a satellite town that's self-sufficient in Hong Kong. And Mei Fu was a new housing development that served that. So I credit that to my uncle. So that might give you a little bit of insight up in the 70s. He was also very concerned with the hygiene. We took part in the Clean Hong Kong campaign with the Lap Sap Chong, swept the streets in Hong Kong, and all the very civic things to do with hawkers, to do with the Jade Association, the taxi drivers. He was a man of the people. He could strike up a conversation with any taxi driver going anywhere, and he would talk and talk and talk, like you were saying. He could talk in any conversation, in any gathering. Low-class people, high-class people, medium-sized people. He always had something to say. And so we called him the man of the people.
Thank you for that. There's also a chapter in here on hygiene and another chapter on hawkers. And there's a chapter on public transport where he first got minibuses recognized.
And San San's chapter 2.
Yeah, so yes. And I love the part about that woman. But anyways, any other questions or any reflections or comments from any family members? Anybody who knows?
Front.
Oh, sorry, yes, right here in the front. Microphone, please.
Thank you very much. You mentioned in the beginning the white paper from the State Council mentioning that democratization processes were halted by the British. And you left it to the audience to decide. What would he say about that?
Hilton, in my view, Hilton was a realist. He fought hard for some time for that sort of gradual constitutional reform and got stonewalled before the British government. Actually, British government was quite dismissive towards that call. But he was the kind of the gentleman. He recognized the constraint and stopped there, and then he switched his focus and attention to livelihood issue, call for compulsory education and other things, and he got some success. For example, the colonial government hit his call for compulsory education and finally introduced 9-year free education in the middle of 1970s. Yeah.
You also write in the book that he, after 1989, he also called on called on the British to give Hong Kong British passport holders the right of abode in Britain, which of course didn't happen.
Yeah.
Did he become upset with the British because of that, or?
There was no record on record thing about this. As I say, Hilton was a person that he make his sounds, make his voice, and then if not heard, he went on to do the things he thinks is true and correct. And I appreciate that Hilton didn't censor what I wrote about on the part of constitutional reform. Actually, I put on record his call for 1988 direct election, and his will on the 1989 crackdown, and he also called for a faster pace of democratization after the 1989 crackdown. He didn't say, I don't like this.
But if he had been listened to, perhaps things may have turned out differently, correct?
Yeah.
Any final question? Because I know it's past. Yes, right here. Front table.
Thank you. Thank you, Gary and Oliver, for your presentations. I'd just like to add some side stories to you, because I was called by Uncle Hilton to read the manuscript that you have prepared for him, because he lost his vision. He could not really read. So I spent a lot of time during his last 18 months at his home to read to him. And I just want to tell you how interesting and fascinating this man was. I read for 2 hours, and he did not ask me to stop. And I finally have to stop. I said, Uncle Hilton, I'm too thirsty. Can I have some water? And he said, oh, of course. I just want to let you know, for a 98-year-old man, he could spend 2 hours just listening to what I read to him. And he could even ask me questions. That's how sharp his mind was. That's one. And another story I want to share with you all. One of his caretakers told me, he said, Uncle Hilton, ask him, what's the name of your district councillor? You should talk to him and complain whatever you don't like about Hong Kong. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other hands, and I think that's about the time, because we're after the 2 p.m. hour. But if you want to hear more amazing stories like that, this is a really cracker of a read. I'd highly recommend it. I read it in a weekend. And if you want to learn a lot about Hong Kong during this, particularly in the post-war years, the occupation chapters in his life in China when he was working at the consulate, was it Guilin?
Guilin, yes.
Absolutely fascinating when he met Pauline, et cetera, but then getting back to Hong Kong and then starting his business and what Hong Kong was like then, joining first the junior chamber, I believe it was, and then the urban, and then the urban council. Absolutely fascinating for anyone who lives in Hong Kong, who's interested in Hong Kong, who wants to know more about how Hong Kong is the way it is now. I do highly recommend it. Congratulations, congratulations. I'm really sorry he's not here, but I think he's here with us in spirit. So, thank you all for coming. You're going to stick around and sign some books, right? All right, thanks.